All right, joining us for this episode is Vincent Alcazar, who has some interesting findings about the relationship between the aviation environment and cancer. Aztec, it's great to see you.
Great, and thanks for having me. Appreciate being a guest.
Give us a little background on yourself to begin with, and then what you've discovered with some of your research here.
Retired from the Air Force 10 years ago. Prior to that, F-15 pilot. And in my deep criminal past, I was an A-10 pilot. So during the 10 years that has passed since I retired, I've become involved in the aviator cancer mission space, first at Red River Valley Association and their Medical Issues Committee, which was established in late 2019 and is still in existence today. And then last summer, we formed the new kid on the block, which is the Military Aviator Coalition for Health, MACH, or Mach Coalition. And this is how we have finally reached our goal, which is to bring in naval aviation into what has been predominantly, because it got started inside the Red River Valley Association, which is predominantly Air Force, but not exclusively. So since then, we've been able to really broaden this entire effort. So when I speak today, I'm going to talk in terms of being the founder and the director of the Mach Coalition, but behind that is my experience in the Red River Valley Association.
What have we discovered? Because anecdotally, I've heard of former squadron mates or a number of squadron mates who were in a squadron at a particular time that came up with some form of cancer, brain cancer, lymph node cancer, thyroid cancer. What have you discovered along the way here with respect to the cockpit environment and cancer?
If you've ever flown fixed wing in the Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, or Army, or you are a veteran aviator, you are at a significantly elevated risk for cancer, and you need to get yourself aggressively checked, and you need to be checked probably annually until such time as that checking no longer is appropriate or required based on other changes in your health. Now, when I say this, there will be probably some people in your audience who are flying today that are assuming, well, wait a minute, I get a flight physical once a year and I get a form sign off and I take it back down to the squadron and I'm good to go for one more year. You're right about that. We check your height, your weight, the color of your eyes, your blood sugar, your cholesterol levels. But what we don't check and what we don't know, because we don't apply all of the advanced tumor cancer screening technologies that exist in the flagship hospitals and institutions across America, none of those things are deployed anywhere in DOD. Nowhere in the Navy, nowhere in the Air Force. And they're not deployed anywhere in the VA. So you can see, if you flew, you're kind of out there on your own. And the cancer study statistics are concerning and are sort of indicate what the degree of the problem is. So that's just kind of the 50,000 foot view right there.
So I just heard something pretty wild. Netflix has more than 18,000 titles globally, but only like 7,000 of those are available in the US. You're missing out on literally thousands of great shows unless you use the sponsor of today's episode, ExpressVPN. So it's really not common knowledge that Netflix and other streaming services hides content from you based on your location. ExpressVPN lets you change your online location so you can control where you want Netflix to think you're located. In this case, I switched my location from the United States to Germany so I can watch one of my all-time favorite movies, Goodfellas. They have servers in over 100 countries so you can gain access to thousands of new shows and never run out of stuff to watch. This works with many other streaming services too, Disney+, BBC iPlayer, and more. It's easy to use. Fire up the app and click one button to change locations. It works on all of your devices, phones, laptops, tablets, smart TVs, and more. And it has blazing fast speeds. Stream in HD with zero buffering. So be smart. Stop paying full price for streaming services and only getting access to a fraction of their content. Get your money's worth by scanning the QR code right here or go to my link at expressvpn.com/Ward to get an extra 4 months of ExpressVPN for free. Again, that's expressvpn.com/Ward. The link is in the episode description, so check it out. Has the data indicated a specific type of aircraft, specific environment? What do we think some of the causal factors are? Is this electronic interference that we're exposed to? Is this fuel oils? Is this different exotic metals that we touch sometimes inadvertently during pre-flight? Or is this a combination of all these things?
Yeah, I like your questions because they're the kind of questions that occurs to virtually anyone that downloads a PDF copy of the Air Force 2021 cancer study, the DoD 2023 study, or the DoD 2024 study and reads it. It's sort of reading it tees up all of the follow-up questions that you just voiced. And the unfortunate thing here is that when we ask questions like what's causing the cancers, that is a function of our legislative advocacy occurring today in the month of May in Congress, in this Congress, the 119th Congress. And there's a specific piece of legislation that would fund what we call a cancer causation study that looks at not only what you just listed, but anything else that would not and did not be, predictable or viewable, that we hadn't seen anywhere else that we wouldn't think of to look for. Instead, where we've been at since these three studies hit the streets is trying to indicate to a very skeptical military operational chain of command, and candidly a resistant military medical chain of command, the whole idea that elevated cancers actually exist in point of fact. So it's been about trying to get the problem statement right, if that makes sense.
Basically, what we know so far is there is a notable amount of cancers in the veteran military aviator population. That's a truth, and the numbers bear that out. Now, what you're saying is more research is required to find some of the specific causation and other atmospheric issues that I was asking about previously here, right? Because naturally, when I hear about former squadron mates getting brain cancer, and then, oh, by the way, another guy who was in the squadron at the same time getting brain cancer, you're immediately like, okay, to your point, first you get screened for cancer by an oncologist or something in the most general sense. I don't know if that's MRIs or, blood tests or whatever, full body screens sort of thing. And then second, you're like, what caused the cancer? And is there anything I need to do in terms of, practice wise to avoid it? And this is probably what current naval aviators are asking you guys now, which is, I'm in a Super Hornet squadron now. Is there anything I can do in terms of when I man up, when I debrief during the course of the flight? Are there certain things that, will expose me? Is it the way I stare at, the FLIR presentation, or, the engine instruments, or my HUD, or JHEMIX, whatever? Is there something about the fit of my helmet? Right? These are the questions that come up, but we don't have those answers yet, right? So right now, what I'm hearing you say, Aztec, is get checked, right? That's part A, get checked. And then the rest is forthcoming based on your guys' initiatives and the things you're putting at the feet of lawmakers.
So this will sound familiar to those of you that are out there flying right now and have lost wingmen, flight leads, et cetera, and flying buddies while you're on active duty. The people that you saw diagnosed with cancer that you flew with exhibit none of the, and alert, here comes a medical term, comorbidities. In other words, they didn't have a body mass index that was way out of proportion for their height and weight statistics, okay? Everyone you saw get diagnosed with cancer was physically fit. Many of them are probably the triathletes, the marathon runners, the people that are in the base gym at 4 p.m. benching 305 like it's nothing, okay? And they were in their mid to late 40s, maybe one or two of them in their early 50s, but mostly in their mid to late 40s. And when you heard about their cancer, it was probably a stage 3 or stage 4 late stage cancer diagnosis, because we're looking at someone who is physically fit, looks good, filling out a uniform and a flight suit, and exhibits none of the outward indicators or signs that anyone in medicine would go, well, if I saw you walk in the door, I would have concluded that you're probably at risk for cancer. The people I know from the F-15 community that died while I was on active duty and they were on active duty all fit the description of what I just said. And so the pattern we see in the active duty deaths, to include the people that are in the Air National Guard or reserves, are the people that have as stage 3, stage 4 cancers that they fundamentally can't survive. And so for us, the question was kind of from the outset, how can we reduce the number of stage 3 and stage 4 diagnoses and make the diagnosis earlier at stage 1 or stage 2? And the great thing about that is if we diagnose you earlier, there is in medical terms, I don't want folks to take this the wrong way, but comparatively speaking, in the annals of human history, there's never been a better time to be diagnosed with cancer than now, because of the number of things that we have at a stage 1, stage 2 diagnosis can get you faster to remission than ever before. When you and I were kids, the number of people that were diagnosed with stage 2 cancers yet still died from them was way too high. But that no longer is the norm in oncology, in medicine. Well, there's going to be only one way that we make the diagnoses happen earlier, and that is if we deploy state-of-art technology. Things that find in your bloodstream minute cancer particles such that we now have an individual flagged for in-depth analysis and evaluation. The problem with the status quo isn't that we're not cared for by aerospace doctors and that those flight surgeons are all good. They are, but it's the tools they use, and it's the examination itself in its design that has to change, and it has to be informed by the data that we've got from these 3 cancer studies, not from practices we were still doing in examinations in 1975. Like nothing's changed. Keep on keeping on the way you are. No, we've got 3 studies that say, dude, it's not a little bit more, it's a lot more elevated than for the same cancers in the men and women who work in cubicles and down the street at Walmart. So whatever it is that's causing our cancers, and these are all great questions, what's causing? Which community has the most cancers? Those are later day questions, and right now we're in early days. So we've just tried to sort of get to this whole idea of, if we're going to ask Congress and DOD and VA to spend more money on cancer research, we first of all got to establish that a problem exists. And the problem just doesn't exist in one man's mind or in the opinion of one organization, or just Navy flyers or Air Force flyers think it's important, but that these peer-reviewed studies, which are huge, by the way, they're the biggest studies of their kind that have ever been undertaken anywhere in the world by any Air Force in any era, that we have a problem that medicine didn't see coming. And we can talk about some of those statistics to give folks just a flavor, not to make them bleed from their eyes, okay? Because we're not here, this isn't a medical school lecture, but it is an awareness initiative so that flyers understand this is out there. We spend millions of dollars talking about surface-to-air missiles, AAA, don't hit other airplanes, don't hit the ground. Why are we not talking about elevated cancer risk? Now, that's a rhetorical question because I haven't met the person yet, the admiral or the general, who has the appetite to answer that or has the insight to answer it. But these are the kind of questions we're asking ourselves.
So the way you're framing it right now, what we're trying to do is create earlier detection, because as you said, if we keep doing the pathology that we've done since the 70s, you're going to find it at stage 3 or stage 4. And that's what we've seen with our squadron mates in recent years. Like you said, it's nothing. The guy's healthy. All of a sudden, he's got stage 4 brain cancer. And you want to go, did you have headaches? And you're like, no, not really. I just went and suddenly I did have an excruciating headache, and I went and they, gave me the battery of stuff, gave me some Motrin. And then I went back a few weeks later and they said, okay, we'll go ahead and do an MRI. And they discovered I have a softball sized tumor
Right.
in my head. Right. So that's time late. So what we're saying is let's move the discovery process to the left so we can catch it early on. You're mentioning some of the data that we have that has created this thesis, which is, like you said, your chance of getting a cancer as a veteran military aviator is X percentage higher than somebody who's not a military aviator. So what's the tail of the tape there that indicates this is so?
We're going to set aside the Air Force cancer study for a minute here because it came first in point of time in May of 2021. And what it did was it basically validated our concern that flyers have elevated rates of cancer. Because prior to that, I'll be honest, the military medical establishment spoke to us and thought of us as children running with scissors. Like the worst thing that can happen is a bunch of fighter and attack pilots in particular having the audacity to talk out loud about anything pertaining to medicine, particularly where it touches their own bodies. And that was where I kind of drew the line, like, okay, you can make me be board certified to talk about your health, but I'm a subject matter expert when it comes to my health. And I can initiate that discussion, and I can have that with anyone who will hear me. The two studies that are the game changers here are the 2023 Department of Defense study. And in that study, there's 156,000 flyer records that are studied. It met all of the standards for a platinum-plated, peer-reviewed, professionally done study by the Defense Health Agency right over here in Falls Church, Northern Virginia. DHA did another study, a follow-up study in 2024. And the difference between the two studies was the 2024 study versus the 2023. In the 2024, they tried to go out and data mine cancer reporting rates in the individual states that have Air National Guards and guardsmen, where those diagnoses were being recorded because many guardsmen don't see the local military hospital because there isn't one. There's at best a modest-sized clinic staffed on weekends, on drill days. So you go downtown to a civilian hospital and they collect diagnostic data in that state according to that state's recording and reporting protocols. But what none of this data does is capture, you're a veteran, what'd you do? You flew? Air Force? Navy? F-14s, Hornets, Vipers, Eagles, none of that is recorded. So much of that data and positive correlation to give us like actual scale of the problem, we're probably significantly underreporting the problem. And that's kind of been an analytic challenge to us all the time. And there's a bunch of reasons why when people do 10 years in the Navy or the Marine Corps, or the Air Force, they separate, they don't retire, they're not seen in a VA hospital, because only 1/3 of all veterans ever are seen anywhere in the VA enterprise. And they sure as hell don't go back to a Department of Defense military treatment facility at the nearest air base or air wing. They go downtown based on the provisions of their employer's private health insurance. Well, HIPAA means that there's a HIPAA wall in there. HIPAA is just a federal law. It doesn't mean we can't see the data. It makes it harder to see the data. So again, we underreport. So we have this chronic underreporting problem. Some of the key statistics, again, kind of the 40,000 foot view. Again, I'm not trying to drive folks away with numbers, but without the numbers, you don't have a sense of scale. And so we got to at least be willing to put out a couple here that are really important to indicate the magnitude of the problem. So in the 2023 cancer study that looked at 156,000 different flyers in the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, and the Marines, it found that everyone's elevated cancer risk for all kinds of cancer throughout the body was 24% higher, which in biostatistical terms, if you compile this data for a living and you write reports for a living, you would say, wow, that's significantly elevated. That's not a little bit. That's not within measurement error. That's not within correlative error. That's like clearly there's something going on here. Now we look at other things that we know are extant human health problems. Look at female breast cancer. Female breast cancer already at an all-time high for women in the U.S. population. Where do all our female aircrew members come from? The U.S. general population. So they bring with them all that breast cancer latency right there. Well, on top of that, in the 2024 study, we found that female aircrew members, regardless of fleet, regardless of seat, regardless of rank, regardless of role, they had an 18% higher cancer risk. That's like the wave on top of the tsunami, given how its prominence in U.S. society. Okay, so that's a number that has two levels of significance, right? It would be different if female breast cancer was among the lowest incident rates cancer. It's not. Now, when we look at men's breast cancer, and if you talk to people in medicine, they'll tell you that the incidence or prevalence of men's prostate cancer makes it in metaphorical terms and analogical terms, it's men's breast cancer equivalent for its frequency. The DoD study in 2023 found that for men, it was 16% higher, but the 2024 DoD study found it 21% higher. So this accounts for all the guys that I know that were diagnosed with stage 3 and stage 4 prostate cancer and are still fighting for their lives. And then the one that really kind of blows away a lot of people, that really is like the flashing master caution on the instrument panel, is melanoma incidence. In the 2023 study, the DoD found that melanoma occurs 83% higher for flyers than for people in the U.S. general population. And that's not a little number. That's a huge number. But wait a minute. Everyone has growths removed from their skin or their face or their nose or their ears or their chest as they age. But remember, melanoma is the one that kills. It metastasizes, does so quickly, and it causes cancers in other parts of the body not co-located with your face, your nose, or your ears. And that accounts for a couple of guys I know that died from melanoma because it metastasized. Liver cancer in one case, lung cancer in another. So that's just the wave tops, if you will. That's kind of the 30,000 foot view of the data.
Again, you don't know the answer to this, but when you say skin cancer, I'm thinking UV rays, canopies, closer to the sun, type of thing. But I'm sure we don't have that cause and effect data. Have we figured anything out with respect to the melanoma piece?
First of all, this isn't a problem that kind of just comes out of nowhere. There have been epidemiologists, that is researchers and scientists, that have been looking at sun exposure for a long time, okay? Actually, as a U.S. public health issue in the course of my lifetime, the first time I remember it being mentioned and mentioned often was starting in the mid to late 1980s. But sunburn and over sun exposure, it's as old as the sun and humans are. In terms of what is causing it here, when we wear Nomex gloves, flight suits treated with Nomex, and we fly around in these bubble canopy airplanes, but with masks and helmets, it's hard for me to understand what the underlying causation is. What we're asking Congress to do, based on the total weight of some, and I shared with you just a minute ago what some of those numbers are. There's a lot more in each of those studies. So you go download those and you wade through them and go, wow, I didn't fall asleep reading this study because it scared the hell out of me. And then now what we've done is we have in the House HR 530, in the Senate S 201. It's the Aviator Cancer Examination Study, the ACEs Act. It would ask the VA to set up on contract the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine right up here in Washington, D.C. They're a think tank. They've got plenty of researchers and scientists who are experts just at the kind of stuff we're talking about. And it would probably take them 2 to 3 years to get to the eaches of what are the role that high altitude flight plays. The FAA says they know a lot about it, and they say they've got a model that measures solar exposure. But wait a minute, the total lifetime exposure of most military flyers is well above and a completely different kind. Ask anyone who spent time at Mach 2 and 50,000 feet than your average airline pilot down there at 32,000 feet, blundering along for an hour and a half between Phoenix and Denver. So these comparisons are not the same, right? We also don't know anything because science has never measured it, nor has it ever been mandated in a laboratory to say, if I turn on an APG 63 or 73 or 82, or you fill in the blank, F or attack series aircraft radar, and these things put out a lot of RF, a lot of energy, as do the jammers we carry. And then look at the folks over on the E2s and the E3s in the Air Force and the Navy, respectively. We've never measured what the long-term health consequences are of these things. And that's not the fault of the people that made that equipment. The Department of Defense never specified the requirement that any of the folks that make and manufacture and install this on the airplanes do these health implication studies. So we're not mad at the defense industry. We're not mad at anybody, actually. What we're trying to do is just get to ground truth. So with the ACEs Act, and we hope gives us, when NASM published its report in 2 to 3 years, it will give us our first ever understanding of what is likely causing, or more likely than not causing, these cancers. Now, is that report going to be the last report you ever read? Probably not, because we started with your questions, which I would call like second and third level questions, like, well, which communities are getting it? What are the ages of the people? What are you doing on these airplanes when you are diagnosed with cancer? And those are all the things that I hope DOD and VA get to. But I'm just going to say, between us girls inside this podcast, I've seen very little analytic appetite in the Department of Defense or the VA to perform these studies in particular that we're talking about. And so this is why I'm talking the royal we, fixed wing flyers, we have to be in charge of telling our own story, which is why we self-organized at Red River Valley, and which is why the Mach Coalition was formed almost a year ago, was that none of the other legacy veteran not-profits that have been out there a long time, none of them are telling our story. And there's a lot of story to be told, don't get me wrong. And we're not the only people suffering from exposures. But as you can tell, or you can probably deduce from what I'm saying, our exposures are entirely different. And they're of a different kind. And that difference needs to be explored through further research. And then we'll go where the data leads us.
So if I'm a veteran military aviator, or I'm a family member of an active duty military aviator, what is my call to action? What is it that I can do right now?
First of all, I want to, and before I answer that, pull up caveat, layman, been working this issue for 6 years, but I work right alongside retired military flight surgeons and other researchers and subject matter experts. So what we haven't done, and I think you can understand why we haven't done it, is we haven't come up with a one-page uber alles, here's what you need to do, these are our recommendations, because of litigation. Okay. People will say, well, you weren't talking to me with my cancer, so I'm going to sue you for medical malpractice. So, one of the things to get us kind of off this meat hook is if we writ large as military flyers have such elevated cancer risk, what does it mean? Well, it means probably more likely than not that whatever screening criteria that we're using that have been pioneered over decades for the US general public is insufficient for whatever it is that we're being exposed to in military aviation. Okay. That kind of goes back to something I said a little while ago. So if those screening recommendations, like the first year you look for prostate cancer, or the first year you look for testicular cancer, or the first year, or do you even test for the presence of other cancers through these leading edge, state of the art, DNA level, chromosomal level studies that are now becoming more ubiquitous in the major cancer flagship research centers in America? If we never do those things in the Department of Defense of the VA, we're going to deprive all our people of access to state-of-the-art information and state-of-the-art warning and lead times. So we will ultimately not succeed in reducing the number of 3 and 4 late-stage diagnoses and pushing that farther to the left to stage 1 and 2. So go be seen, go somewhere where you can be evaluated, where you have confidence that people are using all the available tools to determine you are cancer free. And probably until these other things are deployed, you're not going to have the clarity of knowing when these things first enter or are detectable in the bloodstream years before you present with symptoms. Because as some of us who have seen others afflicted with cancer, when you become symptomatic with specific kinds of cancer, it's already a late stage diagnosis, which means that some window of opportunity to find it earlier and treat it earlier, that window closed, and it closed behind you in point of time, and you didn't know it, and no one tapped you on the shoulder and said, go be seen. So right now, because the military medical establishments are not leaning into this, and I think it's a huge problem, because I think everyone's kind of standing around going, wow, we don't want to get in front of some admiral, or we don't want to offend some general. We don't want to say something heretical here that may challenge conventional wisdom or the status quo. Until the military medical chains of command step into this thing and publish some screening criteria, what we're not going to have is the comprehensive guidance. And to my way of thinking, the Navy needs to take care of naval flyers. The Air Force needs to take care of Air Force flyers. The Army needs to take care of soldier flyers. They're the people on the hook to pioneer all of those things that are the answers to your questions. And then to have a discussion with each flyer that walks in the door and sits down and says, where do I go to be seen for this? And how am I going to be done? And, I think in a perfect world, you would show up for flight school on day one and you'd sign a piece of paper on a desk and it would say, you have access to all my bodily fluids for every year that I'm in naval aviation or the Air Force or the Army. And you'd send it off to a state-of-art lab somewhere that had DOD in front of it. And if they found the presence of any of these troubling or concerning indicators, they'd send an email back to your flight surgeon. Your flight surgeon would call down to you, and then you'd go sit in an office and go, where are we going to go from here? Instead of, hey, it's all good. See, my cholesterol hasn't changed since last year. My seated heart rate is better than it was last year. That's because I'm prepping for a marathon. I see you lost 3 pounds, Aztec, since the last time you took the physical. Good job on controlling the body mass. Okay, that's all important information in the totality, but it's not going to help us do very much to help beat back this huge surge in cancer.
Well, Aztec, the first thing is awareness, and you've started with that part of the solution. The rest is, as you say, data and research and other things that are going to come. So we'll keep in touch with you, and when more is discovered, we'll have you back on to relay what it is we know. For the meantime, thanks for teeing this up and for trying to get ahead of this health issue that facing military aviators.
Thank you so much for your interest and your time.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. If you're not already a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything going forward. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.